I'm part of what we have taken to calling the world ecology conversation. And it begins with the premise that power and life and production and reproduction unfold within the web of life and are not separated from it. So this is very different from a conventional environmentalist or a conventional Marxist approach, which says there are social processes over here in one box and there are ecological processes over here in another. We're looking at how those two moments are entangled. And crucial to thinking through capitalism as a world ecology of power, capital, and nature is showing how materially, biologically, geographically, climatologically, all the major processes of the modern world, industrialization, imperialism, democratization, all of these processes are in fact irreducibly socio-ecological. That's one moment of it. But what we have also developed in world ecology, and this is central to my own thinking, is something that we call capitalism as a system of cheap nature. Now, that does two things. One, it highlights how capitalism has gone about reducing the costs of labor, food, energy, and raw materials over the very long durée. So there's a political economy moment to this. But there's also an ethico-political moment to this, to cheapen in the English language sense of the term, to treat with less dignity, less respect. And so we show and seek to elaborate how, drawing on the groundbreaking work of people like Maria Mies and Silvia Federici and many other Marxist feminists, we show how the creation of these powerful ideas of nature and society have been not just ideas floating in the ether, but have been real abstractions, abstractions that have been created by the powerful, by empires, and by capitalists to redefine the work of women, nature, and colonies, to quote Maria Mies, as less valuable, when in fact they are the most central, the most pivotal elements of work that goes on within capitalism. We are trained, both by Marxists and by many others, to treat work as wage labor work or work within the money economy. But in fact, the money economy and wage work always requires a much larger, more expansive diversity of unpaid work, of the unpaid work of humans and the rest of nature at the same time. So women, nature, and colonies. So in fact, the realities of what we call the economy stand on a much larger base of the unpaid work of humans and the rest of nature. And that is both material and culturally enforced, not just through nature society, but through all the various gendered, racialized, sexualized, and colonial discourses that have real power, that are embedded in the real practices of colonial powers, for instance. So whenever a European power arrives in a new place historically, all of a sudden all the people there become uncivilized, wild, savage, lazy. They are literally, before they are expelled from the land, they are expelled from membership in civilization. So when we use these terms like man and nature and capitalism and nature, we are reproducing a very old colonial mindset that has separated precisely what in our politics today we want to reconnect, that is human life and work with and within the rest of nature.
Following up on where you left, so in our politics, you mentioned that what we want to do is actually kind of overcome these binaries. So I want you to more maybe explicitly comment on what your critique and what kind of the critique of capitalism that you developed maybe with others, but also by yourself, and this vision of world ecology or the framework of world ecology. What does it imply for politics, for political struggles, for social movements, and what does it add? And maybe also kind of the flip side of it is reproducing these dualisms, what in our politics and in our movements, what does it imply in terms of challenges? Like what does it, why is it a shortcoming in political action?
So the hard-won lesson of revolutionary and socialist and anti-colonial movements in the 20th century was that liberation must include all the peoples who have been excluded. So in the early 20th century in socialist movements, The male socialist would say, no, women's liberation has to wait. And then it was the liberation of the global south needs to wait. And then it was gays and lesbians and trans people need to wait. And so one of the crucial lessons is that effective revolutionary strategies have to stop drawing lines around who gets emancipated first. So in the title of my talk today, I quote Thomas Müntzer, the radical priest from Germany in 1524, who says, "The creatures too must become free." And I think that there's a fundamental truth to that that is spoken to by many movements, degrowth movements, solidarity economy movements, right to the city movements, climate justice movements, which are saying that there is no way to carry on the illusion of infinite economic growth within a mythical domain of society and not and meet the demands of all life, not nature as outside of humans, but of all life on this planet. So a radical imaginary has to come to terms with how capitalism is organized work, which is in this strange threefold way. There's the paid work that humans do, there's all the unpaid work that humans do, and then there's the work of nature as a whole. And what we are seeing in some places, without being romantic about this, we are seeing, especially with indigenous movements against extractivism, we are seeing an effort to connect these three moments, where some labor unions, not all, but some, are now saying, as the National Nurses United did during the standoff at Standing Rock, a few years ago, they are saying that pipeline construction represents a clear and present danger to the health of our members, our patients, of the whole society. That signals a watershed in labor politics, to understand that the reproduction of life is central to worker justice. So and that's been an enduring problem for decades. Environmentalists in the United States, not environmental justice activists, not labor unions like the oil, chemical, and atomic workers, but the mainstream environmentalist movements have all bought into this jobs versus environment, economy versus ecology. And the strange thing is that if we look at many radical critiques which have done an extraordinary service to us all in illuminating how capitalism works, but many of those radical analyses use the same language of economy plus ecology. That is the jobs versus environment battleground. So we need indeed to call for a movement of movements, as Andreas Malm asks us to do. And to do that, we need to identify how all these three forms of work fit together in the history of capitalism and in the present crisis. So capitalism not only does terrible things to the web of life, including human beings, so genocides and ecocides are always intimately connected, but it doesn't work because it does those things. That's fundamental to it in a way, and violence is something we need to think about. But it works because capitalism works because it puts natures of all kinds to work in a very dynamic way. That's at the heart of the cheap nature strategy since the era of Columbus. Now, what's happening today is that that's breaking down in a radical way with climate change, and the costs of production are skyrocketing. So instead of nature being a way to reduce costs, they become a way, the web of life is now behaving in a way to amplify costs. And that signals a fundamental crisis of capitalism. So movements need to key into the ways that wage work, unpaid human work, and the work of nature as a whole, that there are ways in which there is commonality. And I think around the question of care and reproduction, not just social reproduction, but social reproduction, as theorists are now coming to terms with, realize it is irreducibly socio-ecological. So this ethic of care has to be holistic, but not just a mushy holism where everything is the same. No, where we understand the specific contours of work and power in the making of this world and how we can transcend it.